In 4 months, I took my incline bench press with dumbbells from using the 32 kilo dumbbells to the 38s. And across that same period of time, I lost 5 kilos of body weight. I went from 75 kilos to 70 kilos. And I was in consistent calorie deficits. During this period of time, I was training for a marathon, running every single day. And clearly, I was losing weight, being in a calorie deficit. But at the same time, I was gaining strength and building muscle because the weights I was using at the gym were going up. It's the common advice that if you want to build muscle and get stronger, you've got to bulk. But it's simply not true. You can build muscle while staying lean and being in calorie deficits or eating at maintenance. And that's the case even if you're an intermediate lifter and you're well beyond the beginner stage. Muscle growth and fat loss is not purely about calories in, calories out, and textbook cutting or bulking. I think it goes beyond just calories in, calories out when you're specifically trying to lose fat and build muscle. Sure, calories in, calories out is all that really matters when it comes to changing your body weight, whether that be through altering your fat and muscle mass. But when you have specific goals in terms of specifically fat loss and specifically muscle gain, there are things beyond the calories in, calories out equation that you've got to be conscious of to be most successful. And there are probably 5 main things that you've got to be conscious of beyond just thinking about purely calories in, calories out. The first thing that you've got to be conscious of is sticking to clean, unprocessed foods. There's this concept of if it fits your macros, which pretty much means you can eat whatever you want as long as it fits neatly within your macronutrient targets for every day. So people will often have macronutrient goals that they want to hit in terms of what they're eating every day. And that might be something like 150 grams of protein, 150 grams of fat, and then 200 grams of carbs. And you can hit those goals by pretty much eating whatever you want. You can eat McDonald's and hit those targets every day. You can eat KFC, you can eat Krispy Kreme, you can eat all these junk and processed foods whilst hitting your macronutrient and calorie targets. And so there's this idea that you should feel free to eat that way because it fits your macros. But I firmly believe that the concept of if it fits your macros is a total scam, especially when you're trying to build strength in a calorie deficit whilst remaining lean. If you look at food as purely calories and purely macronutrients and nothing else, you overlook the damage that these processed foods like McDonald's, like KFC, are doing to your body because you don't realize the oils that they're cooked in or the chemicals that are contained within these processed foods and the harm that those things are actually doing to your health and the effect that has on the muscle building process and also on your ability to lose fat and remain lean. Clean, natural, unprocessed foods are going to contain the most amount of nutrients in them to support muscle growth and also to support fat loss and keeping fat off. The nutrient richness of the foods that are clean and are natural are more supportive of muscle growth and fat loss. And that occurs through various different mechanisms, one of which being natural foods are going to keep you fuller and more satiated for longer. Whereas when you eat McDonald's, you're just craving it even more and more, which makes you more likely to overeat and get fat. Whereas when you're eating natural foods, you're more satiated, less hungry, and therefore less likely to binge eat and get fat. So I'll give you an example. 2 people, they both have a maintenance calories of 2,700 and their diets are both 2,500 calories every day. So they're in a 200 calorie deficit, but the types of foods that they're eating are vastly different. Person A every day eats 2 Big Mac meals and 6 nuggets, which equates to 2,500 calories. Person B, on the other hand, is eating 300 grams of rump steak, 300 grams of chicken thigh, 1 avocado, 6 eggs, 300 grams of potatoes, and a protein shake, which contains milk, fruit, honey, and protein powder, which also equates to 2,500 calories. Person B, who is eating the natural, unprocessed foods, is inevitably going to build more muscle because they're eating foods that are richer in nutrients, that are more supportive of muscle growth. Whereas person A is eating foods that are low in nutrient density, that are cooked in harmful oils and contain chemicals that are not supportive at all of building muscle. And I really think that's common sense. I just guarantee you that person B will build so much more muscle than person A. And whilst they might be in the same calorie deficit through being in a 200 calorie deficit, the results will be completely different. It's common sense. The second thing is being more conscious of your protein intake whilst remaining lean in the muscle building process. So the general rule of thumb is that you should be eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 170 pounds, you should be eating 170 grams of protein every day to support muscle growth. But when you're in a deficit or eating at maintenance, protein intake becomes that much more important because you don't have that extra energy coming from excess calories in your diet. So perhaps consider bumping up your protein intake to something like 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. And that can counteract the fact that you might be in a deficit or are eating at maintenance. The third thing is just being consistent in the gym. Now, in the past, I remember I would come into the gym and be weaker than I was the previous week. And I hear the same thing happen to so many other people. They come into the gym and they can't lift as much as they did last week or the week before. And they get frustrated because they're not seeing that progress over the weeks and months. And I think the main reason why that's the case is because of inconsistency. When you skip sessions and when you're only training maybe 3 or 4 times a week as an intermediate to advanced lifter, that inconsistency is just going to lead to you not making any gains. Only now, when I've started training literally like 6 to 7 times every week, like it feels like I'll only take a day off once every fortnight, is when I've been the most consistent in my muscle gain over time. There's rarely a session where I'm weaker than I was the week before. I'm always hitting the same, if not more, on weights or reps on any exercise that I'm doing. And it might sound crazy to you that you've got to train literally every day to see muscle gain. But you might be at the point now where you're past that beginner stage and you're progressing more into the intermediate lifter category. And so your body is more acclimatized to more frequent training sessions and therefore can cope with that additional volume and training frequency because it takes less time to recover now. And again, because you're in a deficit or at maintenance, it's even more important that you're training very frequently because you need to be giving your muscles as much stimulus as possible in order to continue to grow. Because inevitably, it is a bit more difficult to gain muscle when you're eating less food. So maintaining that frequency and consistency in the gym is very important if you want to stay lean whilst building muscle. The fourth point is that you've got to be training very intensely every session. That means training at a rate of perceived exertion at around 8 to 10 every set. And if you don't know what that means, rate of perceived exertion is essentially a measurement of how hard you are pushing a set. So if you're training at an RPE of 10, which is the maximum, it means that you reached failure and you could not physically perform another repetition of the exercise even if you tried your absolute hardest. If you are an RPE of 8, it means that you could have performed an extra 2 reps. And if you performed at an RPE of 5, it means you have 5 reps left in reserve. So you should be training at a state where you're at an RPE of between 8 and 10 for most of your sets, if not every set. Again, you need to be training with sufficient intensity to elicit muscle growth because your body just really needs that stimulus to build muscle because you're in a deficit and you don't have as much food available to you to build that muscle. The fifth and final thing is you've got to be looking at other aspects of your life and really trying to dial in on them because you're in a deficit whilst trying to build muscle. And so all these other little things become that much more important. One of those is sleep. Now, there was this study which measured the effects of the time spent sleeping on weight loss. So there was one group that was subjected to only sleeping 5 hours every night, whilst the other group was able to sleep 8 hours every night. They were both eating in the same level of calorie deficits. And so by the end of the study, both groups had lost the same amount of weight. But the interesting thing was that the group that was only allowed to sleep 5 hours every night actually saw that weight loss more through muscle than it was fat. And the group that slept 8 hours every night lost more fat than they did muscle. So whilst they lost the same amount of weight, the group that slept more lost more of that weight in the form of fat than they did muscle. And it just goes to show how important sleep is in the context of building muscle whilst eating in a deficit. So be sure to at least hit 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night and be consistent with it. Another thing that has a huge impact on muscle growth is having higher testosterone. So you can imagine if you had two people that were both in the same level of calorie deficit, but one had low testosterone and the other had high testosterone, you can imagine that the guy with high testosterone is going to be able to build muscle whilst in a deficit, whilst the person that has low T might not be able to do that as easily. And there's things that, again, you can hone in on to make sure that you're maximizing your testosterone levels so that it's easier for you to build muscle whilst being in a deficit and staying lean. So some of those things are like getting enough sleep, as I've just talked about. It's things like getting up at the same time every day and going to sleep at the same time every day and making sure that your circadian rhythm is in check. It goes back to things like the way that you're eating, making sure that you're eating foods with cholesterol, which is a building block in testosterone. And foods like that include eggs and red meat, not McDonald's and Big Macs. Again, it goes back to avoiding those processed foods, which contain seed oils and other chemicals that can be harmful to your testosterone levels. Avoiding microplastics that can leach into the food and water that you're eating and drinking. So try to use glass containers instead of plastic containers, and using metal water bottles instead of plastic water bottles. All these small things can actually make a huge difference in your testosterone levels and your ability to build muscle more easily. There are also supplements that you can try experimenting with. One that I particularly like is ashwagandha, which reduces your stress levels and in turn boosts your testosterone. You can experiment with other supplements, one of which is Tonka Ali. I've never tried it, but you might find benefit in it and experimenting with it yourself. So by honing in on all these seemingly insignificant aspects of your life, especially in terms of building muscle, you can boost your testosterone, which then has a direct impact on your capacity to build muscle whilst remaining lean. And that's all the more important when you're in a deficit. So I really do think that when it comes to building muscle while staying lean, there are a few extra things that you've got to be thinking of beyond just simply calories in, calories out, if you want to build muscle whilst remaining lean. So hopefully those 5 things that I just discussed were somewhat helpful and can assist you in your journey of remaining lean whilst building muscle, which I think is the best way to go about it. So if you enjoyed this video, if you learned anything from it, please consider subscribing because we are getting to 4,000 subscribers soon. As always, leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are on building muscle whilst remaining lean. Do you think it's possible? I'd be very keen to hear your thoughts. I read every comment and reply to everything. And I'll see you in the next one.